If everybody can make their way in and take your seats, we're going to begin momentarily. I'm sorry we're starting a little late. The marathon and the parking delayed several people, but I appreciate everybody's persistence in getting here. And I want to thank everyone for coming and to welcome you here in our celebration of the life of John Duncan. And so at this point, we're going to begin, and Sarah, there you are, there you are. We'll begin our program with a song that was it's a call to action and a call to celebration of the principles on which John lived and based his life.
First of all, wow. A life well lived. You can tell how many lives John touched. So you should turn to the person next to you, first of all, and just, if you feel so moved, give them a hug, even if you don't know them. You know? Guitar. Don't you love how that changes the energy in the room? Just now we're all one big family. Okay, so this first song, you probably know it, and I'd love it if you sing along, because I know that's what John would want, and I definitely know that's what Becky wants. So, it's a celebration, and it's If I Had a Hammer. How many of you know it? All right, we're set to go. Here we go. If I had a hammer, I'd hammer in the morning. Yeah, you can clap. What's up with that? I'd hammer in the evening, all over this land. I'd hammer out danger. I'd hammer out warning. I'd hammer out love between my brothers and my sisters, all over this land. If I had a bell, ready? If I had a bell, I'd ring it in the morning, I'd ring it in the evening, all over this land. I'd ring out danger, I'd ring out warning, I'd ring about love between my brothers and my sisters, this land. Yeah, 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 yeah. If John said that's enough, yes, okay. If I had a song to sing, I'd sing it in the morning, I'd sing it in the evening, all over this land. I'd sing about danger, I'd sing out a warning, I'd sing about love between my brothers and my sisters, all over this land. Okay, here we go. Here's the last one. Not only can you clap, but if you feel so moved to stand up and move your bodies, because what a wonderful way to celebrate somebody by standing up. If you don't want to dance, you don't have to dance, but you can just stand up. Then I won't be standing alone as I am right now. Well, I've got a hammer, and I've got a bell, and I've got a song to sing, all over this land. It's a hammer of justice, it's a bell of freedom, it's the song about love between my brothers and my sisters, all over this land. Oh, now we're gonna fade out like I'm on KGSR. Oh.
Thank you, Sarah, for setting the tone exactly as John would have wanted set. As many of you know, or all of you know, I'm Becky. I was John's wife of 43 years. I guess it makes sense to start at the beginning and get the somewhat uncomfortable facts out of the way. John, Duncan, and I moved in together the day after our first date. I was 21 years old, and that was 3 days before I started law school. My mother said it wouldn't last. By the time we married, a year and a half later, she'd admitted she was wrong and made it pretty clear that if it didn't last, the family was keeping Jennifer and John, and I could go on my way. So although I was young, it was easy to see from the beginning what made John special and why I loved him so very much. He was indisputably brilliant, a quiet, strong leader, and without an ounce of pretension. He was easygoing but tenacious when there was a wrong to be righted. He abhorred war, but he was a warrior himself for justice, equality, and equity. He was not religious, but he took to heart the tenets of the Ten Commandments and the Golden Rule. He did not believe in killing, to paraphrase John Prine, no matter what the killing's for. John had spent time in New Orleans in the early 60s. New Orleans became a part of his soul, and his experience there informed him for life. It was during his time there that he, a son of West Texas, became an activist for civil rights, voting rights, and equality. It was there that he participated in his first marches, sit-ins, and demonstrations, standing down bigotry, ensuring access to the polls, and opening public accommodations to all. And interestingly, John attended his last march and demonstration with me this past year for our March for Science. It was in New Orleans he first witnessed the importance of the courts and the power of the Bill of Rights in protecting against the tyranny of the majority. It was also in New Orleans that John became an economist, and in New Orleans he first became a teacher. John was a Keynesian economist, believing a government is charged with maintaining economic stability and maintaining a safety net for its citizens. He endorsed an economy which rewarded the value of its laborers, and he argued for tax and monetary policy which reflected those values. He was very troubled, even far into his disease, by the dramatic chasm developing between the rich and poor in this country and its threat to democracy. John brought those values back to Texas when he returned to teach at Austin College and Texas Tech. His students knew him to be both the most entertaining and the most rigorous professor on the faculty. In the days since John's death, several of his former students have recalled the lively debates he inspired among his students, the way he challenged them to reason and carefully consider both sides before choosing one, the way he charged them to give back to their country and community. Those who have known him in Austin will recognize his passion for giving back through his dedication to and support of so many nonprofits, which provide the safety net when government has failed to do so. At Tech, John was a leader of the Faculty Senate as it moved to oppose the war. It was there he was elected president of the Texas Civil Liberties Union, which he recognized as the most effective organization advocating for those principles in which he so strongly believed. At one point, in frustration about the nature of discourse and politics in Lubbock, John introduced without attribution the Bill of Rights as a resolution at the Lubbock County Democratic Convention. The delegates voted it down as subversive. So John moved to Austin, where he would live out his years. He found symbiosis with the liberals, the lawyers, and the literati here. He took the reins of the Texas Civil Liberties Union as its executive director. You will hear more about those days from Dave Richards and Dorothy Brown later in the service, but we should note that while at the TCLU, he oversaw major victories prohibiting the purging of voters from the voting list and redrawing of disproportionate legislative districts, battles which obviously didn't stay won. During these years, the TCLU prevailed in many court cases prohibiting discrimination, separating church and state, ensuring free speech, and opposing the death penalty, which do continue to be precedent to this day. John was also an astute lobbyist. His keen intellect, capacity for reason, understated wit, and patience made him not only effective at the legislature, but widely admired by both sides of the political aisle, even by those who strongly disagreed with his message. He continued to work with the legislature when heading up the Legislative Analysis Group at the Texas Comptroller's Office under Bob Bullock, where John provided calm in the midst of the Bullock storm, and when he worked in the Commissioner's Office at the Public Utility Commission. One legislator at that time said of John that he was the only person who could make the topic of utility rates and pipeline easements, if not fascinating, at least moderately interesting. John became lifelong friends with members of the Capitol Press Corps, many of you are here today, and I'm so grateful you are. There were no sound bites or alternative facts in John's universe. He did not hand out press releases. He brought stories that needed to be aired and told. For example, stories of the colonias in the valleys that had no water, a 19-year-old with an IQ of 59 on death row, the gay employees in Houston who were being quarantined from the rest of the workforce for fear of AIDS. He was committed to free speech and a free and vibrant press. He had no fear of opposing views discussed in an open and honest setting. He publicly debated Ross Perot and the head of the moral majority. He would visit with reporters at length about complex issues, and they respected him for his honesty, his willingness to lay out both sides of the issues before presenting his position, and for his enduring sense of humor. That enduring and abiding sense of humor was a necessity for surviving Texas state government, and of course, surviving 43 years of marriage to me. It also was a tremendous asset in surviving those early years of the disease as the reality of Alzheimer's set in. It was in John's early days in Austin that we married, and I could not have chosen a more loving, steadfast, supportive, entertaining, accomplished, and handy life partner. And he was really fun. We had so much fun. Among his many handy gifts, John had become a gourmet cook in New Orleans. When we set up household, we agreed things would be very egalitarian, and we would alternate cooking duties. After he had eaten 2 of my meals, he quietly told me, "I have this on the cooking front." His skills in the kitchen saved our twins from the dire fate awaiting them had they been required to rely on their mother to feed them. And he taught both of them to be excellent cooks. John and I bought our one and only home in 1980, an old farmhouse on Bull Creek Road that reminded us of the houses in which we both grew up, 30 miles and 16 years apart. Ironically, we learned after we married that my carpenter great-grandfather built the house that was John's childhood home. Our architect friend, Stanley Walker, dubbed the Bull Creek house the Bungaloid, and John loved that house. John was a very skilled carpenter and builder himself, a talent he passed on to Matt. He milled the wainscoting, replaced the beams, and laid the tile for our first remodel. He stripped and refinished the hardwood floors. He planted the trees which now shade the property, and planted the hedges and laid the flower beds we still enjoy. John was not perfect, but his faults were minimal and easily forgiven. For instance, I could not have married anyone messier. John would have been Marie Kondo's worst nightmare. When we set up household, his first landlord in Austin kept his deposit for pet odor, although John did not have a pet. I love to dance. John could not dance. I thought I could change that. Then 3 months into our relationship, John was emphatically demonstrating to me how he could not dance at the Richards campout when he fell backwards over a ledge and landed in a mud bank in the San Gabriel River. I gave up after that and just loved him anyway. John and I had begun to travel when Jennifer was young, and John was very committed to traveling with the boys from a very young age. He wanted his children to experience other countries and cultures and understand them. He was global in his perspective, well aware that ignorance breeds fear. He wanted his family to focus on what we in the world all had in common and to appreciate the differences rather than fear them. We visited over 50 countries during the marriage, and he made his last international trip with us to Southeast Asia 13 months ago. John didn't dislike many things, but for all the travel, John was not a fan of boats. And if you have been looking at the photo montage and see how many of those photos were made on boats, you realize what a good sport John really was. When I bought a sailboat in the 80s, he gamely joined me sailing several times a week and lost innumerable anchors as he never remembered to tie them to the boat before he threw them overboard. John took his last boat ride with us in Cambodia about a year ago in a small motorboat over 2 miles of very rough sea to the island where we were staying. John braced himself against the seat, set his jaw as we pitched over 14-foot swells. About halfway through, one of the boys asked John, "Dad, how you doing?" He glowered and said, "If I ever get out of here, you're all going to hell." So after 45 years, he finally complained. As you can see from the photos, I'm going to see if I know how to do this, John was just plain handsome. Although when I met him, he was heavily bearded and looked somewhat like a cross between Jesus and a werewolf. Oops. What did I do?
It's a wrong slideshow.
Okay.
Just keep hitting it.
What if I just stop? Okay. Anyway, that slide may come up. And when you see it, those are not mug shots, those are his driver's license photos. When one of his high school classmates, who is here today, and oh, there he is. When one of John's high school classmates, who is here today, and thank you so much, Diane, for coming, learned I had married John, she exclaimed, "You married the young Adonis." I teasingly called him my young Adonis for years. Now, how do I get that photo off? Here. Okay. Although an alum of Boston College in Tulane, John was an avid Longhorn fan for 4 decades, probably attending at least 500 Lady Longhorn games with me through the years. He attended UT football games, including both Rose Bowls, men's basketball, baseball. Baseball was John's sport, although he couldn't play it. And he was a Dodger fan till death, although he never really forgave them for leaving Brooklyn. When we were first together, John and beer had a very close relationship. And he took up road races and began running marathons to lose weight and quit drinking. He was determined to qualify for the Boston Marathon, and he did. But then he injured himself stepping in a hole at the turkey trot and hadn't been able to train for months before marathon day. We were taking Jennifer on college visits during marathon week in Boston. As Jennifer and I headed out to visit Smith College on the day of the marathon, John asked us just to drop him off at the starting line, and he would watch the start and take the bus back. When we returned that day and entered the hotel room, there was no John. Then we heard the groaning coming from the floor between the bed and the window. John was prone on the floor, not able to stand up. He had finished the marathon, although injured, without having trained, and he could not get up off the floor. But he had met his lifelong goal of finishing that Boston Marathon, and he never complained for the next week if it hurt every muscle and bone in his body to move. When John was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, the running and the exercise staunched its progress. It kept him alert and accompanying his family wherever we went. And it kept him happy. Even to the end, he would wait eagerly by the door for Randine to come so he could get to his beloved hike and bike trail. He took on Alzheimer's, the ultimate injustice, with the quiet ferocity with which he took on all other injustice. And he stood the disease down for 17 years. I encourage folks to take a walk along the river today in John's honor. And John will continue to inspire those of us with loved ones who are ill to hold them close, keep them with us and active, stimulated and involved in what they love. John was the ultimate good guy. He was caring, empathetic, and kind. He did not have the capacity for cruelty in any context. He was principled for good and confident, but unassuming in those principles. There is nothing kind about injustice and intolerance. Bigotry and inequity are simply cruel. Perhaps that is why John could not and would not tolerate them or remain silent when he perceived them. He made Texas a better place to be, and he made me so much a better person for knowing and loving him. When John retired, the Austin American-Statesman wrote that he was the persistent conscience of civil liberties in Texas. He put principle above personal convenience and public acclaim. Duncan was never in it for the applause. He deserved some anyway. As we bid John goodbye, please let the applause we give John's legacy be the charge to speak up and speak out when we see wrong, when we see our civil liberties compromised and eroding, when we see the specters of fear and hatred directed toward those who are different, when we see others without the ability or platform to speak for themselves. And in John's honor, let's strive mightily to keep our sense of humor while we do it. Thank you. You want me to just read the whole thing, just sort of. Okay. So Gina Hinojosa, our state representative, is here with a proclamation from the Texas House of Representatives in honor of John.
It's an honor to be here. I did not know John, unfortunately, in his prime, but when I read his obituary, I thought, wow. What an amazing person he was, and one thing that I do want to acknowledge and say that I do know and I did experience firsthand was the power of the love that Becky demonstrated for John when we saw them together in public, and it was that model of love that I remember when I think of him. So I just want to take a little bit of this resolution, not the whole thing, and read some of it, though the whole thing is special. Let's see. Whereas a life dedicated to the fight for equal opportunity and social justice has drawn to a close with the death of John Belton Duncan, Jr., of Austin on February 5th, 2019, at the age of 82. And whereas born in Haskell on November 17th, 1936, John Duncan was the son of John and Lucille Duncan. He was married to Sarah Holderbaum from 1960 until 1975. After that marriage ended, he was fortunate to share a great and enduring love with Becky Beaver, whom he wed in 1976. He was the proud father of a daughter, Jennifer, and after his retirement, he was an enthusiastic full-time dad to his twin sons, William and James. He also had the joy of seeing his family grow to include a granddaughter, Chloe. And whereas Mr. Duncan earned a bachelor's degree in economics from Austin College, went on to his doctoral work at Tulane University after teaching at Xavier University, Loyola University, and Austin College. He taught economics and price theory at Texas Tech University in 1974. He became executive director of the Texas Civil Liberties Union and settled in Austin. He joined the staff of the Texas Comptroller Bob Bullock in 1985, and he was the director of the Analysis Group. In 1989, he took an executive position at the Public Utility Commission of Texas, where he worked until his retirement in 1997. Whereas a highly engaged citizen, Mr. Duncan was active in civic and political life. He gave his untiring support to many nonprofits, ballot initiatives, and Democratic candidates. And in Austin, he could often be found debating the issues of the day among liberals, lawyers, and literati. Moreover, he was an avid Longhorns fan, and he delighted in working around the house, building furniture, repairing cars, and landscaping the yard. And whereas devoted to his family, his friends, and the causes he believed in, John Duncan lived a full and generous life, and the memory of his keen intellect, his sly wit, and unimpeachable integrity will continue to inspire all those who knew and loved him. Now, therefore, be it resolved that this tribute be paid to the life of John Belton Duncan, Jr., and that sincere condolences be extended to his family and many friends. Thank you.
Well, I hope I see you later, 'cause it's time for me to go. And my ride is just pulled over, but it sure was good to know you. And go answer your calling, go and fill somebody's cup. And if you see an angel falling, won't you stop and help her up? 'Cause, oh, well, we are each other's angels, oh, and we meet when it is time. Oh, we keep each other going, and we show each other signs. Sometimes you'll stumble, oh, sometimes you'll just lie down, and sometimes you will get lonely, oh, with all these people around. Oh, you might shiver when the wind blows, yeah, or you might get blown away. You might lose a little color, and you might lose a little faith, but oh, well, we are each other's angels, oh, and we meet when it is time. We keep each other going, and we show each other signs. Well, I reached my destination. Yeah, I finally made it home. And God sent 1,000 angels to make me one of his own. 'Cause oh, well, we are each other's angels. Oh, and we meet when it is time. We keep each other going, and we show each other signs, each other's angels. Oh, we are each other's angels. Yes, we are each other's angels, and we meet when it is time. Oh, I've forgotten how to fly, so won't you show me how to fly? 'Cause we are each other's angels. Yes, we are. Oh, we are each other's angels.
My name's Karen Bartoletti. I met John, who I usually called Duncan, when I went to law school with Becky 45 years ago. Even then, in jeans and a t-shirt, Becky was Becky. She was type A, hyped up, quick to react, often in a very forceful manner. I used to tell people that Becky sometimes used a cannon when a handgun would be perfectly adequate. It was not completely clear to her friends how Becky had teamed up with John, who was as calm, thoughtful, and measured as Becky was amped up. But it was clear that Becky and John were utterly devoted to each other. One memory of that time is when 9 women from the law school, including Becky and me, rented a Winnebago and drove to Madison, Wisconsin to go to a women's conference. On the way back, we got lost. It's not clear how we got lost while driving 1,000 miles straight down I-35, but somehow we did it. And we arrived back at the law school several hours late in the middle of the night. And this was before cell phones. No one had called ahead. No one's ride was there, except for Duncan, who was standing in the middle of the street waiting for Becky. He'd probably been there for 2 hours. John would do pretty much anything for Becky. We used to sometimes play softball with this sort of celebrity leftist team, which included Becky, Marcia Ball, David Richards, Brady Coleman, this whole host of characters. John did not generally play softball. He said he was terrible at it, which was correct. And he came only to watch Becky. But I remember one game where we didn't have enough players, and because he was the most agreeable guy in the world, John agreed to play right field. Of course, halfway through the game, here comes this giant high fly ball to right field. Duncan took one look at that ball, covered his head with both hands, and ran away, like off the field. In the early 2000s, John and Becky and I and our kids went to Cuba, and the differing temperaments of John and Becky were on full display. This trip was kind of an extravaganza. It was sort of semi-legal. We had artist supplies, we had medical supplies, we had all kinds of stuff. John was heavily into photography. He had all of this photographic equipment. This is shortly after 9/11. So on our way to Cuba, John somehow managed to rile up a TSA agent who decided that she needed to inspect all of John's photographic equipment, including the inside of no fewer than 50 canisters of undeveloped film, which for some reason John had unpackaged and was carrying in his backpack. So John is taking the cap off each little canister and handing it to this agent who is like sort of inspecting the inside of each little canister. I'm upset. The kids are starting to cry. Becky, Becky was apoplectic. Duncan, however, was completely calm, nonplussed, pleasant, compliant. And of course, he proceeded to miss his flight. Now, there's really, I'm sorry to tell you, there is no punchline to this story. He did catch up with us at the next airport, and we had a wonderful, wonderful vacation. But it does illustrate some stuff about how Becky and John were together. I would like to say just a couple things about John and his illness. As you all know, John was super smart. So when Alzheimer's was diagnosed, it was easy to think that this was especially tragic. But one of the most admirable things about Duncan was how well and for how long, despite his illness, he held on to this core of who he fundamentally was. Within the limits of his disease, he continued to be wise and funny and kind. About 5 years ago, which would have been maybe 12 years into his disease, Becky and John were at a fundraiser up on Wildcat Hollow. And I found myself sitting on the deck with John looking out over the city. Probably foolishly, I said, "Duncan, I know you're having memory problems, but really, I think you're doing great. We're all getting to where we have memory problems. If someone asked me right now where I parked my car, I would have no earthly idea." And John looked at me for a second and said, "I have no earthly idea where I am." Even very near the end, Duncan continued to preserve that central core. Becky describes asking John one day a couple months ago if he knew who she was, because at that point he was having good and bad days. And she told me that John looked at her for a minute, thought hard about it, and then said, "I know you're someone very important." And I don't mean to make light, but honestly, given that disease and how it had handicapped him, that was the perfect answer. It was thoughtful, it was kind, it was very accurate. So to finish, John Duncan was the wisest, most right-minded, and most generous of men. And he was as completely devoted and essential to Becky and their children throughout their lives as they were to him in his final years. I will miss him, and I will miss them all being together very much.
Okay. We have been requested to play several songs that mean a lot to Becky and to John and to the family. And I want to say that John was one of those unique individuals who managed to go to school in New Orleans and excel and complete while being seriously imprinted with the funk and spending time at Preservation Hall. And this is one of the songs that he carried with him always.
I'm gonna lay down my burden down by the riverside, down by the riverside, down by the riverside. I'm gonna lay down my burden down by the riverside. Ain't study war no more. Ain't gonna 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 study war no more. Study war no more.
Gonna put on my long white robe
Down by the riverside, down by the riverside, down by the riverside.
Gonna put on my long white robe
Down by the riverside and study war no more. Ain't gonna 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 study war no more.
I'm gonna put on my long white robe.
Down by the riverside, down by the riverside, down by the riverside.
Gonna lay down my sword and shield.
Down by the riverside, study war no more. I ain't gonna study war no more. 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 Gonna put down my sword and shield down by the riverside, down by the riverside, down by the riverside. Gonna put down my sword and shield down by the riverside. Ain't gonna study war no more. 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 Study war no more. Ain't gonna study war no more. Ain't gonna study war no more.
I'm gonna lay down my burden down by the riverside, down by the riverside, down by the riverside. I'm gonna lay down my burden down by the riverside. I'm gonna study war no more. I'm gonna study war no more. Ain't 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 gonna study war no more.
You're terrible. You're able to sing. You could walk
Here, hang on to that. Here we go.
What a gentleman.
Can you make it?
David, that's not.
Well, where are you going to do it?
I got it. Hi, I'm not David Richards, I'm Dorothy Brown. Made it up the stairs. I see almost every friend I have in this room, and it's lovely, and honoring John Duncan. I was walking down the aisle at Randall's grocery store, and my cell phone rang, and a friend called and said that John had died. It made my heart hurt. The first time I met John, he was the director of the Texas Civil Liberties Union, was trying to hire an office manager. I had none of the required skills. But my friend Marge Hershey said, it didn't matter, just lie. I told him I could type. And he hired me, and I worked 5 feet away from him for 9 years, longer than either of my first 2 marriages lasted. The Victorian house on 7th and Nueces was filled with interesting people. The house was like a bubble of liberal thought, policy making and activism in an ocean of conservatism. David Richards and Sam Houston Clinton law offices were on the first floor. Molly Ivins and Kay Northcott took a turn running the Texas Observer in upstairs offices next to ours. Molly insisted that her dog, Shit, come to work with her, and Shit had the run of the place. The old icebox on the back porch, painted blue, right, was always filled with beer and other unidentifiable things. The water in the toilet on the back porch that John and that the ACLU had to use, froze in the wintertime. If Hazel Clinton forgot to walk over and pour antifreeze in the tank and the bowl. It was a glamorous time. At TCLU, we had many legal successes around the state and some hard losses. One that took a toll on John and me was our first effort to halt an execution. It was Charlie Brooks. He was the first person to be executed after the Supreme Court declared that the Texas death penalty was constitutional again. I remember we filed a motion to stay the execution late in the evening. And while Hugh Lowe, I saw him somewhere, drove the car, I collated papers in the back seat and stapled them. And we took them to the Court of Criminal Appeals and filed them. And right after midnight, we went back to the office and waited. And right after midnight, the execution was carried out. And we all went home about 2 o'clock in the morning. Another effort we made every year was to pressure the state to remove the nativity scene from the rotunda in the Capitol. Inevitably, people would call who felt it violated the separation of church and state in the Constitution. Every year, we'd file the papers, go to federal court, file the papers to get baby Jesus out of the rotunda, until I think it was Judge Roberts. David said it wasn't. Anyway, he ruled that Christmas was a secular holiday. So it was Nowlin. So it wasn't religious anymore. So John said, we don't have to fight this fight anymore. John was never one to lose his cool. He lobbied against unjust bills in the legislature and endangered civil liberties. And there are always plenty of those. He was admired by both Republican and Democratic members. He did lose his cool once that we know of. In Amarillo, I think it was, he told Ross Perot that he was a dumb shit. We all loved it, as we do, right? But John was really sorry, that he'd lost his cool. Over the past several years, I'd run into John and Becky at functions for good causes in Austin, and I believe that through the Alzheimer's curtain, he remembered me. I really wanted him to. I think he did. Thank you, Becky, and all these wonderful children, Jennifer, Matt, and Will, for taking care of my friend for so long. Just be smart and cool and run fast somewhere, John. How your knees?
They're terrible. Hang on, I'll fall over. I'm good. God damn. All right. It's pretty scary, I know, for you all out there watching us cripple around. Okay. I'm going to talk about Austin in the 70s. For those of you you all are so young. Some of you probably were here then as I look around the crowd. But anyway, Austin was a happening place, if you remember. The Armadillo World headquarters opened up. Willie Nelson came to town. And things were really jumping. And then John came. John came in 1974, and he fell right in with the ambience of Austin. Late afternoon at Schultz Garden, in endless conversations. Our first Fridays at Sam and Virginia Whitten's with John Henry Falk and Russ Lee. And then, of course, the opportunity to hang out with the Austin elite at the old Raw Deal, where there you found the social forces of Austin, like Bud Shrake and Jap Cartwright. It was a special time. John, as Dorothy said, we all inhabited that old house on 7th Street. And as it was my wont on occasion to go up and sit with John in the mornings, he got all the statewide newspapers. And this was back at the time people read newspapers. I mean, that's long since gone, I know. But we were up there one day, and Mark White, who was then Secretary of State, had announced that he was going to mail out 5,000 notices to all the registered voters in Texas to tell them they had to re-register or they'd be purged. And John and I sat there and said, well, we can't put up with this kind of stuff. But I said, John, the problem is Wayne Justice doesn't have the Tyler docket exclusively anymore. They put a Republican over there, and there's some danger if we file in Tyler, we'll end up with a Republican. I said, now, John, he does have the Sherman docket all to himself. And John said, well, I've got a member over there in Grayson County. And I said, well, let's see if we can get a plaintiff. And he called me down about a couple hours later. His member had an African-American maid named who could be our plaintiff. And so I threw together pleadings and chased down Wayne Justice, and he issued an injunction. This was, by the way, I should add that this was the first case to come up under Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act in Texas. Texas had not been covered initially in the act. In 1975, it was extended to Texas. And so we filed the first Section 5 case, stuck the state with 5,000 unmailed letters, and stopped the purge after a good bit of struggle and anxieties. But in any event, it was a major victory, and it's the sort of thing that John loved. Then, this is the one I love, though. Okay. There was a time that the Texas Department of Public Safety had what they called an intelligence division, which was something of a misnomer, which was designed to ferret out radicals in the state. And they had identified one fella by the name of Pomeroy, who was an Eastern Airlines pilot. And they began to keep their eye on him. And then, fortunately, we got our hands on their report about Pomeroy and his dangerous attitudes. And we managed to go public with it and to file a lawsuit about it. But I think you'd like to know the kind of thing that, this is now quoting from the intelligence report. Recently, the subject, that being Pomeroy, challenged Mr. William Bill Aston, the vice president in charge of advertising at Dallas Power and Light, to a debate on atomic power. The debate will be held on March 10th, 1973 at the Unitarian Church in North Dallas. The Unitarian Church in the past has been the sponsor of such radical left groups as the Dallas Peace Committee, the United Farm Workers, Gay Liberation, and was the host of a social workshop in January 1974 where all major subversive groups in North Texas set up information booths. Can you imagine how much fun John and I had with this one? And the press loved it. And before we were through, after filing suit, and they were all mea culpa, trying to figure out a way out of there, they sent formal apologies to Pomeroy and to the Unitarian Church. And then my old law partner, Oscar Malsey, by then was in the Texas Senate, and he dragged the head of Wilson Spear, who was the head of DPS, over to a hearing and got Spear to commit, although we couldn't ever be sure he was being truthful, that they would destroy all their intelligence files and no longer spy on peaceful demonstrations. So that was one of the great fun cases we had, and the Unitarian Church was saved from a further attack. In any event, John was great fun and a great person and made a major contribution to the welfare of all of us. I loved him. And like Dorothy, I think in the late years, he always tended to recognize me, but he always said the same thing. Is Sam Clinton still alive? In any event, thank you all.
From the New Orleans years, from Preservation Hall, from Sweet Emma the Bell Girl. Get the other kind. Just when you think you found your pal, you find him hanging out with some other gal, and then you rave and you crave to see him lying down in his grave. So if your man is nice, take my advice, hug him in the morning, kiss him every night. Give him plenty loving and be sure to treat him right, because a good man, he'll So if your man is nice, take my advice. You got to hug him in the morning, kiss him every night, give him plenty of loving, and be sure to treat him right. Because a good man, you know he's hard to find.
Hello, I'm Jennifer Duncan. I'm John's daughter, and I'm going to read a poem by Mary Oliver, When Death Comes. It's a poem about death, but I think it's a poem about life that he and Becky have shared these many years. When death comes, like the hungry bear in autumn, when death comes and takes all the bright coins from his purse to buy me and snaps his purse shut. When death comes, like the measles pox, when death comes like an iceberg between the shoulder blades, I want to step through the door full of curiosity, wondering, what is it going to be like, that cottage of darkness? And therefore, I look upon everything as a brotherhood and a sisterhood. And I look upon time as no more than an idea, and I consider eternity as another possibility. And I think of each life as a flower, as common as a field daisy, and as singular. And each name, a comfortable music in the mouth, tending as all music does, towards silence. And each body, a line of courage and something precious to earth. When it's over, I want to say all my life, I was a bride married to amazement. I was the bridegroom taking the world into my arms. When it's over, I don't want to wonder if I have made to my life something particular and real. I don't want to find myself sighing and frightened or full of argument. I don't want to end up simply having visited this world.
Thank you. It's beautiful. Wow. So there's one more song that really says a lot about John and something I'm sure he heard in his days down there, written by Earl King. It's called "Let's Make a Better World," and typically of a New Orleans song, it's you could dance to it and you can think about it in equal parts. I don't want to mess it up, so I'm going to put my sheet up here. Well, the world we know is built on skills, and that alone don't count. Because without the joy and the stress of mind, it wouldn't be worth a dime. You got to live and give, share and care, put a little love in the air. And when the people shout, you got to hear them out, 'cause nobody can live in despair. Everybody got to sing, sing, sing. Everybody got to sing, sing, sing. Let's all pitch in and take a stand. We got to make a better world to live in. Yes, society has no priority. We're all one part of a whole, one little bitty old whole. And when the people shout, you got to hear them out. Everybody's got a beautiful soul. We got to pull together, hand in hand. Everybody doing their best. sing, sing, sing. Hey, everybody got to sing, sing, sing. Let's all pitch in and take a stand. We got to make a better world to live in. Hey, everybody got to sing, sing, sing. Hey, everybody got to sing and let freedom ring. Yeah, let's all pitch in and take a stand. We got to make a better world to live in.
Hi. For y'all who don't know me, I'm John's oldest son, Matt. I'm going to share some stories about our dad that are some of my fondest memories. My dad used to always tell this first story to us when we were kids, and I'm not sure if he was trying to teach us a lesson or set the bar. And to be honest, I still haven't figured that out. When our dad was a young boy, he would go outside and shoot dove off the telephone lines, to eat, of course. One day, he went out to shoot the birds off the telephone lines and didn't see any dove on them. However, he did see a bunch of dove on Haskell's old wooden water tower. He took aim and fired. Unfortunately, he missed his targets, and he walked back to the house, put the rifle back in the closet, and went upstairs to play. About 30 minutes later, there was a knock on the door. From downstairs, Belton, his father, called to John to come downstairs. Sitting downstairs was the Haskell city manager and Belton. Belton, who was also the mayor of Haskell, asked John, "You wouldn't happen to know why there would be a hole in the water tower, would you?" John fessed up, admitting to having missed the bird, hit the water tower, and drained the whole town's water supply. And that's the whole story. One of my favorite things to do with our dad was to build things. He would take me to the back workshop and build whatever I wanted to build. We built birdhouses, jewelry boxes for my mom, cork bulletin boards, slot cars, anything really. One day, I wanted to build a bow and arrow, so we went to the creek and got a willow switch for the bow and attached some string to it. Next, we set out to make the arrows out of dowel rods. We were using razor blades to whittle the notch on the back of the arrow, when the razor blade slipped and cut my thumb pretty bad. We went inside, and my dad cleaned up the cut and bandaged it up. Kneeling down, he looked at me and asked if I was okay. After I nodded, yes, he looked me in the eyes and imparted some words of wisdom. He said, "Good, then don't tell your mother." She ultimately found out when she saw the bandage on my finger. But if there is a second thing I learned from my dad over the years, it's that my mom can only stay mad for so long. I learned a lot from my dad, building, cooking, not so much cleaning, and that water towers make for really bad backstops. Building and carpentry is one thing that all Duncan men, besides Will, are good at. Not only am I thankful that John got to see Abby and I's wedding this last summer, but I'm especially glad he got to see us make substantial progress on our house that we were building ourselves. But by far, the most important thing that our dad built with us was the countless memories that we will cherish forever. Thank you all so much for coming today.
For those of you who don't know me, I'm Will. I'm John's other oldest son, and apparently the older brother to a young boy with revisionist history. Before I talk about my dad, though, I want to first start with some thank yous on behalf of our family. First, thank you all for coming to celebrate today. It's truly amazing seeing how many people are here. I know a lot of y'all came from across the country, and it means a lot to our family. Second, thank you to everyone who has sent us their love, support, kind words, or perishable items over the past few weeks. Our family really appreciates it. Third, I want to thank everyone who has played any role, either directly or indirectly, in helping John in his fight with Alzheimer's. His care took a village for many years, and the assistance our family received from others played a huge role in giving Matt and Jennifer and me years with our father that seemed statistically unlikely at the time of his diagnosis. And so we really appreciate that. And finally, I want to thank Sarah Jane and Marcia and John and Sarah for their beautiful music, David, Dorothy, Karen for the beautiful words, and then everyone else who helped us put this together today. We really appreciate it. We couldn't have done it without you. So our dad has been to a lot of events in this room over the years, but this is the first one where he got to decide what he was wearing. And because I know how many times my dad protested wearing a suit or a tie or a tux to something in this room, my brother and I could not bring ourselves to wear any of those today. So instead, I'm going to wear one of my dad's hats. Those of you who know me well probably haven't seen me in a cap since Little League. I don't find them to be all that comfortable, but as those of you who knew my dad for the past couple decades know, he pretty much wore a cap anywhere he could get away with it for about the last 20 years. And often he didn't stop at one. So for at least the next few minutes, this is going to be the appropriate attire. I'm still trying to get it right, though. One of the fortunate things about us having a dad who was a bit older is that it meant that he retired when we were still in elementary school, 4th grade, in fact. And that meant that Matt and I got to spend a lot of time with him because he would often pick up me and Matt from school in the 1991 Toyota Previa and shuttle us and our friends between practices or after-school activities. If you're not familiar with the 90s era Previa, Toyota is thankful. The model, and you're going to Google this and check it out, the model was essentially a minivan shaped like a manatee, but with wheels, not flippers. Seen here, potentially, yes, is our dad in his favorite piñata shirt. But don't let it distract you from the Previa, which is in the background. And it's not the normal looking minivan. It's the one hiding behind the mailbox, the plum colored one. And you're probably wondering why I'm kind of devoting a good portion of the speech to a Previa, but there's a couple reasons. One, John absolutely loved that car, and he kept it running like new for a dozen years. He was an incredibly resourceful handyman, and he could come up with a bootleg solution for almost any problem or inconvenience. From our dad, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. If it is broken, fix it yourself. And if you can't fix it, do something until you can convince Becky that it's fixed. That Previa and John also had a few traits in common. The van wasn't the glitziest car in the elementary school circuit, but it always got the job done. Indeed, it was understated, but dependable and practical, just like our dad. Because Matt and I got to spend so much time with our dad growing up, we got to know him pretty well. But given that he had a 5-decade head start on us, there were other things that Matt and I actually learned for the first time as we were going through the old photos and yearbooks for today. This is a photo of John in his high school yearbook, his senior year. From this photo, Matt and I learned that John was apparently in his high school Spanish club until his sophomore year. It looks like that hobby didn't carry over to his junior year, and based on my personal experiences traveling with my father around Central and South America, I can safely assure all of you he spoke his final word in Spanish in 1953. You can also see that he was an athlete as well. He was the captain of his high school football team in Haskell, Texas. The team was called the Haskell Indians, And our dad, as the captain at that time, was inappropriately referred to as the Big Chief. It was a different era. In addition to the marathon running that Becky mentioned, our dad ran track in both high school and college. And running wasn't something our dad just discovered as part of, some midlife crisis. He was an exercise junkie from birth. Even as his Alzheimer's progressed such that it was no longer safe for him to drive, he would continue to run and walk. Indeed, once he lost the ability to drive, he spent years walking the mile from our house to a retirement center about a mile away, nearly every day, so he could get lunch with Becky's mother, Muriel. And of course, as Becky mentioned, he continued to exercise on the hike and bike trail right out the back door here, twice per week until this past summer. Karen mentioned this a bit, so you'll realize how committed he was to photography. He was a world traveler, and on our trips, he took lots of pictures. I understand that it was Jennifer who introduced our dad to photography, and thus it was Jennifer who created the monster. Our dad would take hundreds of rolls of photos on each of our trips, and he would inevitably engage in a game of wit with airline employees as he tried to get his 60-pound carry-on on board the plane. We called it the attack pack because it inadvertently clobbered dozens of unsuspecting bystanders over the years, often his family members, if they got between my dad and a good photo, or if they chose an aisle seat as he was getting on the plane. It was like the dangers of the beverage cart, but at like head height. The reason our dad insisted on bringing all of his camera gear on the plane with him is because it was arguably his most prized inanimate possession. On a safari trip our family went on about 20 years ago with several other families, including some in this room today, our dad's camera monopod fell out of the Jeep he and the other parents were riding in. And for those curious, the monopod is the pole under the camera on the left. John, apparently despondent, assumed it was lost to the lions. Meanwhile, the various kids on the trip were all in their own safari Jeep, and setting aside the wisdom of that parental choice, the kids' Jeep came across an abandoned monopod. Matt and I immediately recognized it as our dad's, and the guides collected it. Upon returning to the camp about 3 hours later, my brother and I presented our dad with his dusty $30 pole. And although I maintain that we both have given him lots of reasons to love us over the years, I'm not sure Matt or I ever saw a bigger smile or received a bigger hug than at that moment. His 10 years of putting up with us had finally paid off. Although our dad took many spectacular cultural, wildlife, or scenery photos when we traveled, he more frequently had his camera straight on his family. And as Matt and I have discovered over the past week or so going through old photos, he had a real knack for taking embarrassing pictures that will inevitably be used by my brother to blackmail me for the rest of my life. And thanks Jennifer for that. It was also rare, and only with reluctance, that John surrendered his cameras long enough to allow one of us to photograph him. As a result, we damn near had to hire a private investigator to get the photos you're seeing today. And we're thankful to all of you, many of you who've sent us good photos of our fathers from over the years in the past few weeks. As Becky mentioned, our dad was also a teacher, a beloved economics professor for many years. But economics was not all that he taught. Matt and I loved learning from John. As shown, our dad tried his best to teach each of us photography. Matt picked it up better than I did. But granted, the release of the iPhone has since kind of leveled that playing field. But in general, Matt and I wanted to be like our dad. We wanted to do the things he did. In fact, there was a short period where we actually fought over who got to mow the lawn because Dad made it look fun. Our dad was always happy to let us follow his lead, and whether it was yard work, chess, cooking, reluctantly tying neckties, or even the delivery of a bad pun, his inner teacher never disappointed. Speaking of his puns, Becky mentioned them. Today wouldn't be complete without maybe giving one example. So I'll share that on pretty much every flight our family went on for about 10-year period that food was served. My dad would ask us when the meals came around how our food was, and then he would say, well, that's weird. Mine tastes plain. The chef must have been winging it. I warned you. Y'all can take that as a gift from John today. Our dad was also a yes man and a selfless sweetheart. Without exception, he would put my or my brother's or my mother's wishes ahead of his own. As an example, I loved golf growing up. I still do, in fact. My dad, on the other hand, hated golf. He found it to be boring, and as a general rule, people who golfed in the 1960s and 1970s didn't always see eye to eye with my dad's politics. But notwithstanding the fact that he'd rather be watching a Longhorns game or doing the New York Times crossword or doing really anything else, he would take me to play golf nearly every weekend growing up. To be clear, he was a terrible golfer. And it didn't help that the clubs that he used were a set he bought at a garage sale in 1959. Not only had they been purchased during the Eisenhower administration, they were a left-handed set, and my dad was right-handed. But none of those obstacles fazed him. Without fail, he would grab those clubs and walk around the local pitch and putt with an 8-year-old brat each week. And he would smile while doing so. Never once did he complain. Never once did he try to get out of it. He was just a good sport, as he always was about pretty much everything in life other than formal attire and boats. And even when he was out of his comfort zone, whether it was on a golf course or out on the water, our dad never had a problem making himself comfortable. He would, quite literally, go with the flow. Finally, I want to say a few words about my parents, if we can bring them up. There's good photos of my parents coming, I hope. They celebrated their 43rd anniversary a few weeks ago. You all know that my mom and dad had different styles and traits. And they operated, as she mentioned, at very different paces, to say the least. But that is what made their chemistry so magical. And our mom and our dad were each the yin to the other's yang. Our dad loved our mom more than anything in the world, and he was a supportive, entertaining, dependable, and loyal husband. And my mom reciprocated and showed him immeasurable love, care, patience, and compassion for more than 40 years, and especially in the recent years as he battled the disease. Alzheimer's is unrelenting, and I'm sure many others in here have witnessed its effects with their own close friends or loved ones. But it almost met its match with our dad. He fought the disease for nearly 2 decades, but he did not let it stop him. And he demonstrated that Alzheimer's is a disease that can be battled and not just succumbed to. I truly believe that his years of continued activity and engagement played a huge role in his fight. And we urge others who have a loved one with the disease to do all that they can to continue to incorporate them into their world until the very end. I'm going to miss my dad dearly, but he will continue to serve as an inspiration to me, as he always has, and I hope he will also serve as an inspiration for others. We will now close with one more song by Marcia Ball. You should all feel free to sing along in celebration of our dad, and after the second full verse, people may start making their way into the foyer and outside area where there will be refreshments waiting for the reception, which we started a bit late, so the reception will go till a bit later as well, 4:30 or a bit later. Thank you.
Sarah Jane and Sarah and join me up here, and we're going. And this is not necessarily for your tears, although this has been such a beautiful program. What this is for you to pass around and take one. And as you stand up to adjourn to the lobby and to the terrace, I would like you to wave your hanky in the air as we do a second line out to the lobby.
saints go marching in.
Oh, when the sun,
Oh, when the saints
begins to shine,
begin to
when
shine,
the sun,
when the sun begins to shine, and I know more.
when the sun,
The sun begins to shine.
all right, y'all.
Oh, when the saints go
Oh, when the saints
oh, when the saints
marching in,
go marching
oh,
in,
when the saints
go marching in, how I want to be in that number. Saints go marching in.
oh, when the sun
Oh, when the sun
begins to shine,
begins to
oh,
shine,
when the sun
sun begins to shine,
I
what
wanna
I
be
want to
there.
be begins to shine.
No.
Lord, I wanna be in that number when the saints go marching in.
Oh, when the saints
Oh, when the
go
saints
marching,
go marching in.
oh, when the saints
When the saints go marching in.
wanna be
in that number when the saints go marching in.
oh, didn't he ramble? Didn't he ramble? Yes, he rambled all around in and out this town. Didn't he ramble? Yeah, he rambled. Oh, he rambled till the butcher shot him down. Oh, when the saints
Oh, when the saints
go marching,
go marching in.
oh, when the saints
Saints
go
go
marching
marching
in,
in.
I wanna
In that number, saints go marching in.
I wanna be oh, when the saints
Saints
go
go marching. Yes, Marsha Bar.